Do you remember that wonderful moment where Arthur in Camelot is thinking in his internal monologue, what a world is this? What a tangled, reckless, chaotic world is this, where men lift the sword against men, where power is nothing but brute strength, and the weak are left to perish in the shadows. But no, not here, not in Camelot. It must be different. It shall be different. Might? Yes, might has ruled since the dawn of time. But what if might could serve right? What if strength was no longer a weapon to crush, but a force to uphold? No more warlords, no more barons clutching for land like beasts in a field, no more blood spilled for greed alone. No, there must be a law above the sword, an order beyond the chaos, a round table where knights do not fight for themselves, but for justice, for honour, for something greater than themselves. And so we shall make a new world. We shall build a Camelot where all men are judged not by birth but by deed, where chivalry, not savagery, rules the heart of man, where might, yes, might, that unyielding force, shall be harnessed, bound in service to what is right. And Guinevere, my Guinevere, she shall see it, she shall understand. As will Lancelot, the most fearless of knights. They must let it be so. Let it be written in the hearts of all who come after Camelot for one brief, shining moment. And, you know, it's an important thing, this idea that might is not necessarily right. The phrase might is right is as ancient as power itself. It suggests that those with strength determine what is right, whether that strength comes from armies, political influence, or economic power. But if might alone determines justice, is justice truly just? This debate sits at the heart of the Camelot legend, shaping King Arthur's doomed quest for a kingdom ruled by law rather than by force. Yet this question is not confined to myth. It pervades modern politics, where figures like the Attorney General, Lord Hermer, finds himself at the centre of a battle between legal principles and political expediency. Today, I want to explore this tension through these two lenses. At first, Arthur's moral struggle in The Once and Future King and its musical adaptation of Camelot, and second, the contemporary political fight over Britain's adherence to the rule of law. And T.H. White's novel, The Once and Future King, presents Arthur as this young idealist tutored by Merlin who hopes to replace the rule of force with the rule of law. And Arthur's epiphany, the idea that might should serve right, not define it, leads to the creation of the Round Table, and he institutionalizes chivalry, hoping to civilize knights who would otherwise rule through brute strength. But Arthur's utopian vision is destroyed from within. The betrayal of Guinevere and Lancelot, the scheming of Mordred, and the inability of law to prevent human nature from taking its course expose the frailty of his dream. And by the novel's end, by the musical's end, Arthur understands that his experiment has failed, not because justice is weak, but because power, unchecked, inevitably seeks its own advantage. And Lerner and Lowe's musical adaptation, Camelot, distills this tragedy into poignant theatrical moments. Songs like Camelot express Arthur's hope for a world, a utopian hope for a world where might and right coexist harmoniously. But by the time Mordred mocks the very notion of virtue and fie on goodness, Arthur's dream is shattered. As he sends a young page to preserve the memory of Camelot at the end of the musical, we're left with this lingering question: can such ideals ever truly survive in a world that defaults to power? Now let's step out of the medieval world and into contemporary Britain, where a different Arthurian struggle is playing out, not in castle halls, but in Parliament. And the Attorney General, Lord Hermer, finds himself under attack for his unwavering commitment to legal principles. A human rights lawyer turned government legal chief. Hermer's crime is not corruption or incompetence, it's his belief that law, not political connivance and political convenience, should govern decision-making. Law alone should be there. His opponents particularly, and law, if law isn't right, then law needs to change. You don't circumvent it, you change it if it's not right. And his opponents, particularly on the populist right, argue that the UK should free itself from international legal constraints from the ECHR because it's not being convenient to the International Court of Justice. And the attacks on Hermer take two forms. The first is personal, his past legal work, his left-wing associations, his appointment by Keir Starmer, that make him an easy target for critics who see Labour as lawyers, not leaders. And the second is strategic. It taps into a deeper argument about whether international law still serves Britain's interests in a world where the great powers routinely ignore it. If Russia disregards borders and Trump disregards treaties, why should the UK be shackled to legal formalities? When everybody else around it is doing it, why should we follow the law? Might is right. Hermer's most controversial act has been defending Britain's commitment to international institutions, particularly in the case of the Chagos Islands. The UK was forced by an ICJ ruling to negotiate the return of sovereignty to Mauritius, an uncomfortable decision for those who see the ruling as an imposition by foreign judges, some from former European colonies, China and Russia. And critics argue that these institutions, once shaped in Britain's image, no longer serve Britain's interests. But Hermer's supporters counter that retreating from international law is a dangerous gamble. The UK post-Brexit is no longer a global power capable of enforcing its will unilaterally. It benefits from the rule-based system that it helped to design. To abandon it when it becomes inconvenient is to invite the return of a world where only power dictates what is right. Perhaps the clearest modern equivalent to Arthur's Round Table is the European Court of Human Rights, and much like Arthur's chivalric ideal, it represents an attempt to replace brute force with legal order. And much like Arthur's ideal, it faces constant challenges. Critics, including Nigel Farage and elements of the Conservative right, argue that the ECHR unduly restricts British sovereignty, particularly in preventing deportations of criminals and asylum seekers. And they claim that its ever-expanding interpretations of rights make it less a protector of justice and more a barrier to national self-determination. Hermer and Starmer argue the opposite. They say that the ECHR is a necessary shield against political overreach and the problems attributed to it, such as deportations being blocked. These problems are often due to practical issues rather than the court's rulings. But the problem remains. When ordinary people see foreign judges overriding their government, the law begins to feel detached from justice. And this too echoes Camelot. Arthur sought to replace personal vendettas with legal principle. But when the law was manipulated by Mordred, for Mordred read Farage, to serve political ends, it lost legitimacy. If the ECHR is to survive, it must demonstrate that it serves not just abstract ideals, but the people who live under its rulings. So does might make right? If history, literature, and modern politics teach us anything, it's that power is always tempted to dictate morality. King Arthur fought to replace might with justice, only to find that the powerful often bend justice to their will. Lord Hermer stands in a similar position, defending legal principles where political forces seek to sidestep them. And not just the political forces of the far right, also of the left. Yet the lesson of Camelot is not entirely bleak. Arthur's dream doesn't die with him. It endures in the memory of this young page who will carry the story forward. Likewise, the struggle of the rule of law is ongoing. The UK may not always win in international courts, but it has an interest in preserving a system where law, not brute force, determines justice. To abandon the rule of law would be to embrace the world that Arthur tried to leave behind. A world where the strong rule without challenge. Arthur tries to quit that world and to create a new world where law is supreme. And for a country that no longer commands an empire, abandoning law is a perilous road to take. As Arthur tells the page, don't let it be forgot that once there was a spot, for one brief shining moment, that was known as Camelot. Whether we defend the rule of law or let power dictate right will determine whether Britain's ideals continue, endure, or whether, like Camelot, they remain only a beautiful lost dream. But that lost dream is something worth remembering, isn't it? It's not forever to be ignored, forgotten, broken. It's not broken entirely on the crushed under the foot. There's an interesting point. So really, before you get into the serious book of the once and future king, in the Sword and the Stone, the pike tells Arthur, and the pike is of course terrifying in the Disney film. The pike tells Arthur, there is only power, might is right. And the geese, in contrast, live without war because they're flying above the borders. It's just another way of life, and it's the geese which give Arthur, I suppose, the idea of the round table, and the and Arthur's utopian vision, this vision of Camelot, his attempt to build a world where might serves right rather than might dominates. This is so important. And of course, when I think of Camelot, I think not only of Richard Burton, his deep melancholic voice, which gave Arthur gravitas, optimism, and ultimate heartbreak, but also of Julie Andrews and Robert Goulet as Lancelot, Julie Andrews as Guinevere, embodying youthful passion but also regret. So all of these characters in this mythology, in this legend, are given depth and humanity. And one of the things I think that we tend to do when we're looking at politics is forget the humanity. We need to put that back.